Hey folks, so I want to kick off this video with a little bit of housekeeping and I guess a few announcements. So first off, I've obviously been away and haven't made any videos in a while, and I do definitely apologize for that. Basically, I've been just really busy with graduating, so I had like final exams and things like that the past couple of weeks, as well as just the actual graduation ceremony with my family and things like that. And also, as you might be able to tell by just looking around behind me, with the bookshelf being empty and things like that. I'm actually in the process of packing, and I'll actually be moving this weekend, which starts on the 16th of May, and I'll be moving for a couple of days. But hopefully I will be back in full force next week starting on May 18th, and I'll be putting out regular content again, hopefully like 2 or 3 videos a week. As well as, of course, just working, doing commentary and analysis for the MLG CEVO Pro League for Season 7 throughout the regular season, and hopefully I'll be at the LAN in July as well. I believe I'll also be working with the USA qualifiers for ESWC coming up soon as well, because CEVO is going to be working with that, and I will be as well. So basically be on the lookout for all that stuff coming out here the next few weeks. Also, I have plans to start a new vlog series. So obviously this vlog series has just been like the state of NA CSGO, and I've done a couple of other little random ones as well, and I'll continue to do just some random ones about like relevant topics I feel in the scene right now. But also I wanted to start a Who Is series. So I know Thorin has done some Who Is series. I think he did a Who Is Forest, a Who Is Dozia, and a few other videos like that. I wanted to do something like that for North America. And basically this is kind of responding to Thorin's challenge that he did in one of his Thorin Thoughts videos about, give me your analyst or something like that, where he was talking about how people need to start thinking more historically and having like a bigger context to what they're talking about, rather than maybe more shallow and surface news topics or something like that. And maybe this wasn't quite what he meant. I think he was maybe talking about for even like deeper pieces like that. But I at least wanted to start dabbling in a more historical perspective by doing some Who Is videos about some of the North American pro players, especially since I know that some of the viewers we have now were definitely not here, a year ago or 2 years ago. And so I kind of wanted to maybe highlight at least some of North America's top players and kind of how they got into CSGO, maybe what some of their background was before coming into CSGO, and what their CSGO career has been thus far, and maybe what their potential is going forward, so to speak. And so that is something I'm going to be working on over the next few weeks. I'm going to try to make it a bit personal too, so I think I'll actually even try to interview some of these players. Not on stream or on video, but I'll probably send them like a questionnaire just to get some more like maybe personal things about before CS or whatever, so I can have like a lot of information to go off of on top of just my own research from watching their tournaments in the past and where they were at in the past and following the news, and basically so maybe get like an actual personal touch by getting some answers from some of the players on some particular questions. And so be on the lookout, like I said, for that Who Is series coming out hopefully the next few weeks. Now I want to address another thing. Some people have been asking me if I'm bitter or something because Thorin started doing some NA scene videos, as I guess people thought that I felt that was like my turf and no one else should step on it. It's my scene and my ideas or whatever. But in reality, no, I could care less. In fact, I think it's awesome. I mean, more content the better, especially quality content, which Thorin does produce quality content pretty much all the time. Maybe every now and then he goes a bit too far in some of his ramblings on lands, but for the most part his knowledge and content is quite great. And so I applaud it, and I have open arms towards anything he wants to do as far as any community goes. If anything, it's maybe somewhat validation for some of my own observations and conclusions, because we basically arrived at many of the same conclusions, especially in regards to like the NA roster shuffle and things like that. I think we had a lot of the same concerns and things like that in that regard. And then as far as some of the other issues he addressed in the other NA scene video that he did, I felt those are issues that we have all been talking about in the NA scene for a very long time, especially amongst us commentators and analysts. Like me and Moses had private discussions about this stuff all the time, things I've talked to Steele and other people about as well. So I think it just brings to light some of the problems we've been talking about maybe privately for a while. And it was great content. So no, I'm not bitter at all. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching them. You know, especially I think one of them was like an hour and 22 minutes, and a lot of DMing went on that day to get through that video, and it was a good video. But now I am going to pick up on some roster changes that have happened since the last video that I made that I haven't commented on yet. So basically just giving my thoughts, mostly initial thoughts, because I haven't seen them really play a whole lot yet, on some of these different roster changes, as well as the situation that some of these teams find themselves in right now. So we look at Nihilum, and Hiko comes in for Professor Chaos, and obviously I've already talked about Symphus joining the team in a previous video that I've done, so go check that out if you haven't already, if you want to hear my thoughts on the whole Symphus move, and the Symphus leaving Cloud9 and the Symphus joining Nihilum, what I felt about both those moves. But as far as Hiko joining Nihilum, obviously this is good for Nihilum as far as picking up a guy who's very talented. I mean, Hiko is probably one of the hottest free agents out there, next to Skadoodle, for a very long time. And so obviously they picked up a very talented player, also one with a lot of experience and who can help maybe strategically. So plus, that's a plus move. Now, as far as who he replaced to come into the team, he replaced Professor Chaos, which was the main opera for this team. Now, I will argue with anyone who tries to say otherwise. I mean, a lot of people say, no, Automatic's the main opera for this team, or no, Sanctum is the main opera for this team. That's not true. I mean, I watched both their recent lands at ESCA and CEVO Season 6, ESCA Season 18. It's very clear that Professor Chaos was their main opera on the T side, especially. On the CT side, yes, you will see Sanctum or Automatic pick up the op occasionally, depending on their positioning and the map and things like that. But Professor Chaos was, all in all, their primary op, especially on the T side. And to bring in Hiko, who's more of a lurker passive player, passive rifler, maybe not pure lurker anymore, but more of a passive rifler nonetheless, to replace a aggro T-side opper. Granted, I know with the op nerf, you can kind of get away with not having a crazy T-side opper, and in even some instances, teams have preferred to go 5 rifles and only use the op situationally on like hybrid players and things like that, and that's definitely a route you can take. But the point is this particular move got rid of an opper for a passive rifler, and when you look at that direct swap, you have to kind of maybe wonder if that was the best person to replace. I mean, I guess you definitely don't want to replace Automatic and Sanctum because that's the 2 entry fragger riflers for the team on the T side, as well as just pretty good CT side riflers as well. And yes, they can both pick up the op, especially on the CT side, but their primary purpose, and I feel the position where they have the most impact, is going to be as that aggressive rifler, you know, on the T side, and then just holding down spots on the CT side. So my point is, I think if you put an op in one of those players' hands, you take away from their ability to have an impact with a rifle, which is where they're most likely going to be able to produce. Not saying they can't produce with the op, but like I said, on CT side, they can definitely be good for opping, and maybe situationally on T side you can give them an op, but that takes away from one of your entry fraggers that are going to entry with the rifle on a side if you have them holding an op. So it's like, you know, kind of give and take on that perspective, and but I guess you couldn't really replace Valence because that's technically the in-game leader. Though I have to say that, you know, Symphus probably does a lot of the leadership nowadays, especially even from comments I've heard from the team themselves, that that's the case. So you kind of wonder if maybe that was at least a possibility, like a Hiko for Valence instead of a Hiko for Professor Chaos. But, you know, whatever. At the end of the day, even when you kind of look at the pros and cons, or you look at some of the cons underneath the microscope, you can still say that overall this move is probably good. They don't necessarily need a dedicated opera, though I think it would be very beneficial to the team if they did. And that may be something to look at down the road if they're struggling, you know, with opping, basically, that maybe they might need to replace someone else to bring in an opera. But at this point in time, I think that they're still fine. I mean, I've been watching some of their games recently between the ESA, ESL Pro League and our CEVO MLG Pro League, and they've looked pretty sharp for a team that has been together such a short time. They look fairly disciplined in their T side for the most part. Their CT setups are generally pretty good. I mean, I've seen them beat, you know, CLG here recently, as well as I think they had like a tie against Luminosity recently as well, doing well on cash, but just kind of really doing horrible on T-side dust too. So I think there's definitely some kinks that need to be worked out on that team, but I think that Nihilum is definitely a team that will be contending for playoff spots for LAN for both ESL, ESCA, and MLG CEVO. So I think overall, pretty decent move. Now we look at Luminosity Gaming, they've made some changes as well, so I never really talked about Peter joining, I don't think. I know I talked about him leaving CLG or him being cut from CLG, whatever that situation may be, but he comes on the Luminosity as an opper and an in-game leader. I think those were two departments where the team lacked, and so those are definitely two departments where LG can, basically make a good move by picking up a guy like Peter. Though I would say Peter in his own right can be somewhat inconsistent with the op. Yes, we've seen his big games where he went off against LDLC at Aspen, or where he's had some decent games even at at the Season 6 Pro League Land. He had a couple of good maps here or there, and I think maybe during the Katowice qualification process, I think he may have had a map here or there that was decent, though I think it was mostly Tarek who was doing the bulk of the work at that particular event. But anyway, point is that he definitely has shown at times that he can be a big player with the op, but it's not sustainable, it seems like. It's very like kind of one-off games where he does really crazy stuff. Like, for example, in an online play recently when they were playing against Nihilum on D2, he dropped like a 30 bomb, was absolutely nuts on CT side with the op on D2. But then, some other games I've seen him play, and he's been kind of, on the bottom of the scoreboard. Mostly because other people have stepped up, like NAF, like Pitt, like some of these other guys on the team are fragging really heavy, so he doesn't necessarily need the frag hard, and he is also in-game leading. So, point is I think, outside of Skadoodle, Peter's one of the best oppers we have in NA right now. Granted, the opping department of NA is pretty worn thin at this point, so it's not like we have a huge, crazy depth chart of great oppers in NA right now. It's pretty much like Skadoodle on a tier by himself, and then you have kind of everyone else right below that. But I would say Peter probably, rises to the top out of all the other oppers right now at the pro level in NA. I know you had some other oppers out there still trying to prove themselves, like Shahzam, who recently joined Tempo Storm, and some of these other guys, but in reality, Peter probably is kind of the number 2 guy in NA right now, in my opinion, just based off of offline play. And so this is a good pickup. Now, they also picked up Pitt, which I talked about in a previous video already. All I can say is that watching some of the online games recently, he's looked, quite skilled and good aim and things like that, which we kind of knew that was going to be the case, but it just depends on if he's going to be enough to carry this team to victory was kind of the question that I asked. You needed guys like Anger stepping up again. Obviously, his online stats are always crazy, but they need to be able to have him perform on LAN, and he hasn't done so in a long time. It's been like 6 or 7 months since Anger's been able to perform on LAN at the level that we expect from him. So hopefully he can come around as well. And this also brings me to another player that they picked up to kind of help Pitt as far as like a star player, so to speak, which is going to be NAF, who used to play for Liquid. Young guy, I think he's 17 years old, kind of a hybrid player. Can be an aggressive rifler, can also pick up the op as a secondary opper to Peter on double op setups and things like that. I will say this, though, even he has looked horribly inconsistent. Like, yes, I can see some potential there. Yes, I've seen him perform quite well on some different occasions. But, during X Games Aspen for Liquid, as well as during the Katowice qualification process for Liquid, where they didn't qualify, but which is basically, I think, the last event he played for them before they, removed him for Liege, if I'm not mistaken, was kind of that Katowice qualification process. He did not look that good. I mean, he looked horribly inconsistent. I mean, yes, he does have good maps here or there, but I've also seen him play quite poorly. And from what I understand, there's some issues with immaturity and some issues with, him just kind of getting on tilt, just kind of maybe emotional instability when things aren't going right. He kind of just mentally shuts down and becomes basically kind of dead weight at that point, like he can't produce whenever the pressure's on, basically. Now, granted, he is 17 years old, so, I mean, obviously he's got some growing up to do in that department as far as immaturity goes, so I can't really fault him too heavy for that. He is still just kind of a kid. He's still in high school. And as far as emotional instability when you're losing, a lot of people get tilted whenever they're losing. So, in fact, it's very rare, it seems like, in the NA scene to find players who can keep their cool underneath heavy pressure and things like that. So, all in all, yes, there's definitely some cons with Nav, which is why I think Liquid benched him and brought in someone else, because they saw those cons as being maybe too big to overlook, but I still think that Naf does have some skill. He's a young guy. He could definitely, with the right coaching and development, and just by growing up and becoming a more mature adult, I think he definitely can still be a guy that can be good for the NA scene as far as the skill level that he brings to the game, the skill set he has, and you know, he's one of those hybrid guys, and I think that he can be very beneficial to this team if he can find some consistency and grow up a little bit and develop and, you know, just gain some maturity, and maybe just work on his mental composure when he's under pressure and things like that. So basically my point is throughout all the news that Luminosity Gaming has made, they have, you know, gotten rid of players who have been struggling or had commitment issues, and have picked up people who are more committed and do have more potential than the person that they got rid of. So obviously Flom was benched for this NAF pickup, and obviously Flom has been struggling a lot recently for this team when you look at the Season 6 Pro League LAN he was at. If you look at ESEA LAN, even some of his recent online play, some of his decision-making has looked shaky. So you can understand why they felt the need to make a move there. I mean, they've already brought in Pitt, a very skilled player. They obviously have Anger, who can be a monster, especially online play whenever they're qualifying for lands and stuff like that. So you already have those two big name players. You have Lex lurking. You've just brought in Peter as probably one of the better opters out there in NA. You know, right below Skadoodle, he is probably the next best guy, and he's helping with in-game leadership. So they've already made all these other moves, and it seems like NAF brings in another guy who can have an impact. So I think overall Luminosity has made some good changes here. It's just, is it going to be enough to get past some of the hurdles they faced at some of the most recent lands they've attended? And we'll just have to kind of wait and see. So far their online play has looked okay. I've seen them, you know, split maps with Nihilum. I've seen them beat CLG. So, you know, off a very small data set, it looks okay, but it's way too early to call, basically. Now we move over to Liquid, who actually dropped DAPS after Face It, where they had a really tough event. Of course, they faced off against Fnatic first and got quickly 2-0'd there on Mirage and Kabul, I believe it was. Both very one-sided games. Then we saw them play against Immunity. They lost 1-2. If I remember correctly, they won, what was it? I think they won Inferno quite handedly, but then I think it was Mirage and Cash. They lost close games, like 16-14, 16-13 games. Sorry, my memory's a little bit hazy on that, but I feel that's pretty accurate. I mean, yeah, on paper, when you look at the Fnatic losses, you kind of just brush them off because it's Fnatic. But at the same time, when you watch the actual games, decision-making was quite poor, even in advantageous situations, like 3 versus 1 with the bomb down. I think people were even, like, the clip went around about Krems getting like a 1 versus 4 against them, or 1 versus 3 against them, and just kind of shaking his head like, what the heck, like, how did I win that? And as a viewer, you have to ask yourself, how the heck did you win that? Like, Liquid should have that round, you know, no problem. And there were many situations like that throughout that series where, well, I guess mostly on Mirage. On Kabul, it was just kind of a blowout, but on Mirage, even though it was like super one-sided score, you could just see the opportunities Liquid had to win more rounds, and they just poor decision making, you know, not being on the same page type situations, which is a thing I talked about with Liquid in the previous video. You know, how they, during the Katowice qualification process, when Das was the in-game leader instead of Adren, which Adren did take over IGL for that team, if I'm not mistaken, for Face It, and maybe going forward that'll remain. But, yeah, back in the day, I kind of saw the same problems, just, you know, not peaking together as a team, people kind of maybe not being in sync with someone else and doing something that didn't make sense to what their teammate was doing, and just not synced up, basically, is the best way to put it. And it looked that way again here at this event. So, yeah, I mean, here's the thing about Liquid. I even did a video entitled Liquid, the NA Fountain of Youth, and while that does come with its positive side, you know, you have a bunch of young guys who have a lot of potential, that have skill, you know, like Nitro, you know, like Elise, you know, some of these guys who have showed some promise online and on LAN. But even still, the most experienced player on that team was Adren, and the next most experienced player was Nitro, who had only been in the pro level of CS for like 6 or 7 months, so even still not very experienced. I mean, he had only been to, what, 2 really big lands before he came to Liquid, which was the DreamHack Winter 14 with iBuyPower, and then Season 17 ESEA LAN with iBuyPower, right? So even in his own right, he doesn't have that crazy amount of experience, even though he's definitely showed some promise. So yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things where the youth hurts them because of the inexperience. You know, basically just talking to a Dren, you know, a guy who is more experienced, he's, you know, watching his team play while he's dead, he just sees them make decisions or plays that no veteran would make just because they know better. And some of these guys just don't know better yet because they're so new to professional play, or especially against the level of professional play that they're hitting when they're going to these big international events. So yeah, I think, you know, with Liquid, they decided to drop Dash. They have picked up Flowstick for now to fill in for Gfinity. Whether that'll be their permanent fifth or not is hard to tell. I don't know what their plans are. Honestly, I think their best move would have just been to do the Hiko Skadoodle thing and maybe even leave Liquid, go to a different org with the Dren, Nitro, and Fugly, and that would have probably been their best bet to be something special. But now, you know, they just, I don't know, man. I don't see it. It doesn't look good when you watch them play. And they picked up Flowstick, who definitely will be a guy who is more experienced, who probably won't make the same mental mistakes as some of the other guys would. And so you can add a little bit more of a veteran presence to the team next to a Dren, and maybe that'll be beneficial. I've seen them play some online games with Flowstick, and they looked a bit more disciplined. But at the same time, we'll just have to see how it pans out, man. But I think that they're definitely in danger mode because they are one of the bigger sponsored teams in the NA scene. Yet, when I think about LAN qualification right now for some of the big NA leagues, honestly, their team name kind of arrives more towards the bottom of the list. Like, I feel teams like Cloud9, like Nihilum, like even Elevate, maybe even Luminosity to a degree. Some of those teams I feel like have a better chance of qualifying for LAN right now than Liquid does, just based on their situation they're in right now. And I didn't mention CLG. That's maybe probably another team, even though we'll talk about CLG in a second with their own problems, right? So, yeah, we'll just have to see how they play at Gfinity with Flowstick, I guess, and then we'll just have to go from there. But there's definitely there's too much youth on the team is the point. Yes, youth is good. Yes, you know, young, up-and-coming guys with skill are good to have, to mold them, to develop them. But you need people on that team to develop them. And if the players you have developing them are in-game leaders who, in their own right, have very little experience, it's not a very good formula for success. So I think they just need more of a veteran presence and experience on this team to help some of those younger guys like Nitro and Elige and Fugly kind of develop better. Maybe they just have too many of the young guys on their team. I don't know. But, yeah, they definitely just look rough, not on the same page still. And they definitely have some things to try to change to try to help that. So, yeah. And I feel like with the Dren, he can be he's a very smart guy in-game leader-wise, though I don't know what his leadership style is like, but I feel like he just needs to hold these players more accountable. He needs to crack down on them, you know, give them the discipline hammer, basically, and maybe really sit down with them in preparations and really just kind of go over every situation, you know, hey, in this situation we do this, in this situation we do this, you know, don't do this, like more hands-on coaching basically from him, maybe, and more micromanaging or whatever, just to get them up to speed decision-making wise. That could be another thing to think about, but that's just a small aside. So I move on to CLG, who still don't have a fifth, basically. They've been using different stand-ins like Mo and like JDM, and I know they've been scrimming with Cadian. And apparently you can scrim with CLG too if you just apply over at, what is it, CSGO at clgaming.net, I think it was. So you can apply now, and maybe you too can have yourselves a tryout. So first off, that's just kind of silly. I mean, the amount of troll emails they probably got is unreal. But I guess at least it alerted like European pro players and other region players that, hey, this team would be willing to consider a player from outside their region. So if I am interested in playing on an NA pro team, then I can get in touch with these guys. So yes, it is kind of silly way to recruit because it's just a bunch of troll emails in your inbox probably. But at the same time, it does become like the bat signal out to the rest of the world. Like, hey, we are willing to consider players from other regions. If you're interested in playing on a North American pro team, let us know. Because here's the thing, with CLG, when they're doing their recruiting, they're probably reaching out to players they know on the NA scene or free agents on the NA scene. Guys like Professor Chaos would be a great free agent here. He can op. He is a skilled guy. He could come on the CLG and help them in that department. So that could be a guy they consider, yes, in the NA scene. I know they've been considering Mo, but I guess it was just announced recently by Mo that he's definitely not going to be their full-time fifth, so I guess that's out of the window now. Yeah, it's one of those things where I can understand just at least putting the signal out there that they're looking for players from other regions for CLG. And Cadian's a guy they've been playing with a bit. That could be a good pickup for them. Honestly, they do need some more knowledge on this team, like a guy who can help with mid-round calling and help with different things like that. I think Cadian could do that. You know, his experience as an analyst and as an in-game leader for some different teams from that scene, he could definitely be a guy that adds some experience and some decision-making to the team. Just because when you look at some of the recent games, like you're looking at these videos that Steel does where he reviews their demos, and it's just the most common sense things that Steel's pointing out that they're doing wrong that some of the players like Tarek are just completely unaware of. Or even like Steel is 100% right, yet you know guys like Tarek or whatever will challenge them with some meaningless reasoning as to why you know they did the right thing and Steel's wrong to criticize it or just whatever. And you can just tell that they still need some knowledge on that team. And maybe a coach would help with that as well, which it seems like Steel's kind of coaching them on stream right now. I don't know if that's like official, but I mean, he's reviewing their demos a lot on a stream and talking to them about things. So even if he's not officially their coach, he's giving them some free coaching on stream right now. And it's definitely good stuff. And I think Moses helped with that as well on one of those like real talk videos or whatever. So yeah, I think they could definitely use a bit more help in the in-game leading department on that team. Not saying they have to drop finesse or whatever, but I definitely think that he needs some help. He needs some other guidance to help that team right now, because you watch them play, and like I said, some of the decision making on that team just it does look, for a team that does have some talented players like Tarek, like Cutler, and even though they lost Peter, who was a pretty talented opper, they still do have some talented players on that team, and they should be performing better, is my point. And they're kind of in a dangerous spot right now because they're kind of unstable with their 5. And they're suffering a lot of losses early on in some of these regular seasons for these NA leagues because of that. And right now they're not in danger mode yet, but eventually if they can't get their act together, they may not qualify for some of these LAN events. So they need to be a bit careful and try to figure things out quickly so that they can get some wins under their belt, because I know they've suffered some losses and some ties that you would think they should be able to overcome with the level of play that they've attained. And being like an NA representative in some of these international events recently, and having one of the bigger sponsors, you feel they should be clearly ahead of some of these other teams, but they're struggling against some of these other teams right now. So we'll just have to see what fit they settle on. Like I said, I think Cadian would be a good choice as far as helping them with mid-round calling and decision making and coaching to a degree. I think a set coach would be beneficial as well to this team to help with reviewing their mistakes and things like that. I know some other guys out there like Moses, Steel, and Thorin have talked about this idea that they don't review demos properly and things like that, and there's no need me to add comment to that. It's pretty obvious that's a big issue. So I'll just kind of leave it at that. Hopefully they can come up with a solid 5th soon, because they're struggling right now, and hopefully they'll keep moving in the right direction as far as coaching and reviewing their mistakes and coming up with better systems and things like that. Yeah. So there's only 2 really other quick roster changes to talk about real fast. I won't spend too much time on these because I don't think that they're really that relevant anyway when it comes to pro, because I don't see either of these teams really qualifying for anything anyway. But basically Tempo Storm picked up Shahzam, so this means Shahzam gets another shot playing at the pro level in NA after being benched from Cloud9 due to poor performance, mostly with decision making, not necessarily aim. So Tempo Storm is, to me, kind of like a 6th place NA team right now, kind of more towards the middle of the pack rather than towards the top qualifying for LAN. And I think Shahzam's still a good enough opera to be competing at a pro level, though I don't think he's good enough to be on obviously not a Cloud9 because he's already got removed from the team, but I also don't really see him as being like a prime candidate for a CLG or anything like that wants to be like a top team in NA qualifying for LAN and competing internationally. Shahzam's just not there. His raw aim might be there, but his decision making's not there. And so I think that this is a perfect fit for him, kind of a middle-of-the-pack pro team. Maybe he can develop more in that spot and then work his way back up again in the future. But as of right now, his current state, I feel like that's about where he needs to be. And I think he will help out that team opping-wise. But in reality, I still can't see that team qualifying for LAN or anything. Maybe they'll upset a team here or there in a best-of-1. And they do have some other talented players on that team as far as fragging ability goes, but they're not at the level of some of the top NA teams, or they shouldn't be if some of these other top NA teams can get their act together. Tempo Storm should be more of a middle-of-the-pack team, probably. When we look at the other recent change that I saw, I think was, I'm going to pronounce his name wrong probably, but Maxaki or Maxaki, I don't know how to say it. But anyway, he joined Ace Gaming, and apparently Little Robin also came over as a manager or coach for Ace. I don't really know much about this guy, Maxaki or whatever. I know he played for Orbit and some other, like, I guess, lower-tier Swedish teams in comparison to teams like Fnatic and Nip, who kind of dominate the Swedish scene, at least for the last year or so. I mean, I know we had, back when, Krentz and these other guys were playing on, our Olaf Meister, some of the other guys were playing on, like, LGB and some other Swedish teams. There was some other Swedish teams that are also good next to Fnatic and Nip, but since then, since that move where those players like Olaf and Krentz came to Fnatic, there really hasn't been a third Swedish team that's been very, very powerful, next to Nip or Fnatic in the national scene or in the top 10 rankings or whatever. But I know that Maxaki and even Pitt, who's now on LG, and some of the other guys have competed on teams like Orbit and like Property and some of these other kind of Swedish teams that are not really on the radar in the grand scheme of things when it comes to like top international teams. Even if Maxaki was an amazing player, it's not going to be enough for Ace. They don't have enough talent on that team. They're not going to be a playoff contender right now. I just don't see it. Yeah, they have some decent players on that team, but there's not enough talent to go around. Even if Maxaki winds up being like this crazy star for them, or however you say his name, like where he's just like carrying, it's not going to be enough. They need some other really talented players on that team, and like who do they have? They have like Pex, they have Disciple. I can't remember off the top of my head. I know they were playing with Statutory Ape, but I don't know if he's still playing with them or not. They've shuffled their roster around quite a lot. So honestly, it's really even hard for me to kind of put my finger on exactly who their starting five is going to be from here on out. I know they've been using, like, I think they have Monty now, Neil. So there's just not enough talent on that team, in my opinion. Even with Maxaki or whatever, however you say his name, it's just not enough. To me, it's just irrelevant. That team's still not going to qualify for LAN, in my opinion, in either CVO MLG or ESC ASL. They're just not up there. I mean, here's the thing. Like, for ESC ASL, there's 4 NA teams that qualify. So I think that if I had to name my 4 teams, I think Cloud9 would definitely be kind of number 1 to qualify in that regard. Over on the ESC ESL side of things, you got Keat Stars over there, so I think that that's kind of a locked-in team to qualify. So that's 2. So there's 2 more spots left, and you have teams like CLG and Elevate and Nihilum, and I guess even Liquid to a degree, all competing for those last 2 spots. So basically you have like 2 teams I feel will definitely qualify over there between Keat Stars and Cloud9. And then you have 4 other teams fighting for 2 spots, and I just don't see Ace or Tempo Storm or Paradox or Affinity or any of these other teams really being in position to compete for those final 2 spots. And over at CVO MLG, you have 3 spots for NA right now, because you have the 2 guaranteed teams, Fnatic and Envious, and you have 3 more EU slots, and then you have 3 NA slots. And there is no Keat Stars in that league, but you still have Cloud9 probably locking in the spot, in my opinion. And there's 2 more spots, and you have still CLG, Elevate, Luminosity, Nihilum, Liquid, all fighting for those 2 spots. And so I just can't see Tempo Storm or Ace or any of those guys overcoming those names to get one of those 2 spots. So their roster changes are not completely irrelevant, but at the same time, not enough for me to see them move ahead of some of the other teams I listed. So I think that about does it for this video. A little bit longer than I expected already, but talked about some of the most recent roster change news that is out there that I haven't already talked about in previous videos, and also just wanted to make some announcements about some plans I have for some future work. Hopefully you'll be seeing me commentating a lot more as well. With me graduating, I'm going to try to just put in a lot more hours commentating over for CVO and MLG for the Pro League, and I'll make videos as much as I can as well. So yeah, be on the lookout for all that stuff. Thanks a lot. Peace.